All right, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's 1:30. Councilmember Lawson, do you approve the minutes from the March 26th meeting?
Yes, I do.
All right, those minutes are approved. Item 3A, Bill, March 2024 sales tax chart.
Good afternoon. Appreciate you having me again this month. We'll see how many months that goes on before you've had enough of these economic updates. So I'm going to start with a conversation about sales tax. For the month of March, we collected $22.1 million in sales tax, and that amount was 1.7 or about 8.9% more than March 2023. So good growth, but you're going to hear the same message out of me. I think this is at least 3 months in a row where I'm going to say, please don't overfocus on a single month. So 8.9%, really good sounding number. But we've had 2 good numbers and 1 bad number. I think the number I would have you focus on, and it's in the top right of that graph that's on the screen, is that we are up compared to last year, 2.5 million more collected in the first quarter of this year compared to the first quarter last year, for growth of 3.5%. So I think, again, that's a really good number to focus on and not get carried away with either the really low numbers or the really large numbers you see on the percentage growth chart. The other thing, and this is again in that little box in the top right, compared to our budget plan, we are $1.5 million ahead of where we thought we would be in our budget plan. So we take the whole year amount and we try to estimate how much will come in each month. Right now we're sitting 1.5 million above that plan, which is to say we're really right on track to meet the budget plan for sales tax. A few quick facts as to why I think we are where we are, and some of these are offsetting, but we've had really strong growth this year in what we call variable sales tax collections. And so variable sales tax are more one-time sales tax, typically representing business to business sales. So we see, for example, with IT companies, they may sell an extremely large piece of equipment or multiple pieces of equipment. We saw this with the creation of a data center. And it creates this one-time inflow of business to business sales that do generate sales tax. So far this year, we've seen about 881,000 more than we saw a year ago. So that's a big factor behind this, behind the growth that we're seeing this year. Another reason that we're seeing some growth in sales tax is sales tax incentives are down 411,000. And just as a reminder, the Cornerstar URA expired at the end of September 2023. So that really explains why we're seeing less incentives, which means we're keeping more of the sales taxes that are generated out there. So again, another factor behind some of the growth that we are seeing. Very brief conversation about the sectors. The biggest thing that really jumps off the page when you look at collections by sector is that utilities are down just over $1 million. And what this really reflects is how high natural gas prices were a year ago. So with lower prices now, we are seeing collections from utilities down. If you move beyond that one sort of major player, out of the total of 15 sectors that we look at, 11 of the sectors are up on a year-to-date basis. So we are seeing growth fairly consistently through most of the sectors, again, helping explain why we are seeing some growth so far this year. That's really it for all I had to say. I'm certainly here if there are any questions about the sales tax returns.
Councilmember Lawson, any questions?
Just the question about the Cornerstar. So just quickly on that. So when you're stating, I'm just trying to understand that. So what does that actually mean? If new stores go in or new businesses go into that area, how is that impacting this? We're still not collecting, or we're still not, I'm just trying to understand that if new businesses that are coming out, which I know that there are some that are coming in.
So previously we were essentially returning most of the sales tax collected at Cornerstar per an incentive agreement. And so when that incentive agreement expired, which it did at the end of last year, we're now keeping 100% of the sales tax generated there. So that's whether you're an old store, new store. So we're just keeping more of the sales taxes, again, that are generated in that specific area.
Okay, so it doesn't matter if it was a new business or a new business coming in or an old business, we're still collecting the 100% sales tax.
We are now, which we weren't last year. So that's the big change.
Okay, thank you for helping me understand that.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right, thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Item 4A, Teresa, 2024 large fleet financing.
Yes, this is the introduction of an ordinance that we typically do annually for the lease purchase of heavy fleet equipment. In this year's package, we have about $6.7 million worth of equipment, which includes 4 dump trucks, an asphalt patch truck, asphalt roller, chip dumper, 3 tractors, 2 bumper trucks, a mobile command center, and some fire chief vehicles. I'm sorry, I have a scratchy throat. We typically put those out for bid, the financing out for bid to local banks and other smaller financing entities. And in other words, we don't go out to the public markets to finance these. It's a smaller transaction. It will be amortized over 10 years. And we're asking if M&F will approve that moving forward to study session. Happy to answer any questions.
I don't have any questions and I'm okay moving forward. Councilmember Lawson.
No questions. I'm good with moving it forward.
All right, thank you. Teresa, 4B, debt book.
Yes, this is for information only. And it's a report put together by our financial advisor, Hilltop Securities. And it outlines all of the existing debt that the city has, and not just the city, but water, sewer, golf, general improvement districts, urban renewal, etc. And in this packet, you will see details of all those different categories of debt, along with descriptions of the actual issuances, when they were issued, what they were issued for, and you'll see debt service on each one of those issues. It differs from the report of last year because we've had an additional 1 year of amortization. So you'll see the principal amounts on the outstanding principal amounts on the issues have declined by 1 year's amortization. And also we added 2 issues. Last year, we did the heavy fleet financing. That was about $7.5 million. And we did a sewer transaction for almost 44 million for the First Creek Interceptor. So those would be 2 additions to the outstanding debt of the district. I'm happy to answer any questions. It's got a lot of detail in it, including rating reports and things like that. It's a great reference if you're ever wondering what an issue was, what it was financing or the assets behind it and that kind of thing. But it's really put out for your information only. I wasn't planning to go through the packet, just to let you know essentially what is in the report. Happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Lawson, any questions?
No questions for me.
All right.
And thank you for the information.
Teresa, for the update. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jezrina, do you want to present 4C and 4D together?
Yeah, absolutely. They go hand in hand. So this is for Painted Prairie Business Improvement Districts numbers 1 and 2, petitions for simultaneous exclusion and inclusion of property. So essentially, as the development plans have evolved, some of the property that should be included in the bid is currently in the residential portion and vice versa. So the bid is seeking to clean that up and have portions of property included into the bid that should be and excluded that should be part of the residential development.
I'm okay moving forward. Councilmember Lawson?
I'm okay with moving it forward as well.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
4E, Jezrina.
Yeah, so this is the Eagles Nest Metropolitan District. It is a small metropolitan district near South Aurora Parkway and East Smoky Hill Road. So they have completed all of the financing of their infrastructure and they've paid off all outstanding debt that the district had. However, they still have a few years remaining to collect their ARI mill levy per the service plan. The current board of directors has decided to step away. They are no longer interested in serving on the board. So Eagles Nest is including additional property into the district of which the owners are amenable and willing to sit on the board for the sole purpose of having a board intact to continue to remit the ARI to the city.
Councilmember Lawson, any questions, and are you okay moving this forward?
No questions and approve to move it forward.
I am as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 4F, Nancy Wishmeyer, 2023 External Audit Pre-Engagement.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Nancy Wishmeyer, City Controller. And in the packet, you have 2 letters that are required communication between Forvis, our external auditors, and you as the audit committee. The first letter is the engagement letter, and this letter outlines the services that the auditors will perform during the audit. It talks about the fees for those services, also outlines all the responsibilities that the external auditors will have, and also those of city management and staff. And then the other letter is the pre-audit letter. And this one dials in a little bit more on the scope and the timing of the financial statement audit. And based on the information that the auditors gathered when they were here back in the fall, they did the interim field work. Based on that information, they'll also outline areas that they found that they believe that you should be aware of as the audit committee. And these are usually areas, sometimes they're higher risk, sometimes they're areas where just bigger dollars, maybe they're things that are a little bit more unusual. This year, you'll notice they had outlined the revenue recognition, and that's something that they usually outline every year. There were a couple of areas where, in the past, they've outlined things like debt and capital assets, and they didn't include those this year. So each year they'll go through, and based on their testing during interim, they'll identify some areas that they want you to be aware of. And then they talk about how they will address risks associated with those areas. And then they specifically call out in this pre-audit letter any of the accounting standards that will be implemented this year. And so this time they've called out GASB 96, and that's the subscription-based IT arrangements. So that's a new standard that we have to implement with this audit. And then finally, they will call out the possibility of fraud, and then they discuss some of the audit procedures that they'll perform in order to address the risk of fraud. Do you have any questions concerning these 2 letters?
Councilmember Lawson, any questions?
Just a question, in here, what is the time frame? Do they start from, I kind of was glancing at these, but what's the time frame of these to be completed or brought back to us for review, or how that works? I'm sorry if I'm not clear. So
that's fine. They are out auditing right now, so they come out in the first part of April. They spend the month of April going through all of our work papers. The month of May is the month where we're putting together the financial statements, the notes to the financial statements, all of the supporting schedules, everything else that will go into the annual report. And then usually by the first part of June, mid-June, that's when they will issue their opinion. And at that point, we can publish. Usually we'll try to go back to the committee. It's in June or July. Sometimes we have vacations or other things that will kind of prevent or determine the exact date when we come back to you. I think this year we're planning on doing that in July.
okay. Thank you so much for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Item 4G, Michelle Crawford, Internal Audit Q1 2024 Report.
Perfect. Great. So Michelle Crawford, City Auditor. So today I'm going to be going through our first quarter updates for you. Next slide, please. So overall updates, the police auditor position has been filled. Tim Martinez joined our office about 2 weeks ago. So we're working on onboarding him and getting him up to speed in the police auditor position. Additionally, have scheduled peer review dates, which is our quality assurance review, and we're looking at late summer for that, and we'll come back with more information once I have dates finalized for that. Next slide, please. Next slide. So overall engagement updates, so active here in the second quarter, facilities management is still active and is in the reporting stages. The review of non-competitive purchases is in reporting. Central Library cash handling review was completed in April. I'll present on that today. And then property evidence was completed in the first quarter as well, and I'll present that today. Next slide, please. So overall engagement tracking updates. So a new measure that we're including is the percentage of audit recommendations accepted by the auditee. So for property and evidence, police accepted all recommendations, public works accepted all recommendations, and for library cash handling, library and cultural accepted all 4 recommendations. Next slide, please. Additionally, continue to provide tracking updates in comparison to our audit plan. Still continue with the 2023 as we wrap up those 2 final engagements. Additionally, in the 2024, you'll see that one moving next quarter to completed, but we'll continue to provide these as we wrap up some of those older engagements. Next slide, please. Wait till you find it. So the graphic, when she finds it, what it's going to show is the recommendations outstanding by department as of March 31st, 2024. And so this recommendation is all of the departments that started with recommendations outstanding of January 1. As we add them, as they close them, we'll track this throughout the year for 2024. Orange is depicting those departments that have had recommendations closed through the first quarter. And then additionally, citywide is referencing those audits where it impacts multiple departments, not just assigned to one specific department. Next slide, please. So completed engagements. So the property evidence compliance review was completed on the police side, and I completed that this spring, and it was presented to public safety in February. The audit objectives were to determine if controls over property evidence were functioning as intended, determine if property evidence records were accurate and complete, and to determine if the intake process for property evidence was efficient and effective. Next slide, please. Our conclusion was the controls observed, other than access controls, were functioning as intended. Inventory records reviewed were accurate and complete, and intake processes as observed were efficient and effective. However, controls around access are not functioning as intended. Next slide, please. The first significant finding that we had was that there is a significant access vulnerability that exists across the city and was known to Public Works for months. It was not immediately addressed and has impacted property and evidence and continues to exist. Due to the nature of the vulnerability, I cannot publicly disclose any additional information around that. However, we have a recommendation in place for Public Works facilities to immediately prioritize and address the vulnerability impacting property and evidence. The second significant recommendation was around access controls, specifically around networked badge readers. What we found was one door going into the property area, 62% of the people listed as having access should not have had access to that door, including facilities employees, IT employees, contractors, etc. It is a secure area with restricted access, as that's where we store our evidence. There was no documentation from Public Works on who approved that access and authorized it. The police department was not aware, and their process is to require escorts when in this area. Property evidence did have secondary controls in place, and we saw no anomalies regarding to access. However, by allowing themselves access and others, they overrode controls in this area. Our recommendation is for Public Works facilities to remove access for unauthorized individuals, and they did that upon our request last fall. We also recommend they cease adding themselves to access readers in restricted areas and develop procedures preventing employees from granting access to restricted areas without approval. And for Aurora Police, we recommend they request and review those access reports quarterly or when an employee leaves the unit. Next slide, please. Moving on to the Central Library cash handling engagement. The background was this was in addition to the 2024 audit plan after a request from city leadership. The audit objectives were to determine whether cash handling policies and procedures existed and if they followed leading practices, and determine if internal controls existed and if they're operating as intended to safeguard cash receipts from loss. Next slide, please. Our conclusion was that cash handling policies and procedures were incomplete and did not always follow leading practices, and internal controls over cash handling were missing in some areas. Next slide, please. For the internal controls, the library did not have adequate cash handling internal controls in place. Some of the missing controls include segregation of duties, and that's where you don't want one person performing every single step in a process, specifically around handling cash, secondary reviews, and documented reviews. In our audit report, we recommend detailed internal controls for the library to implement. Next slide, please. The library cash handling procedures were limited and didn't address most elements you would typically see relating to cash handling. Missing or incomplete procedures included responsibilities and roles, opening and closing procedures, balances, so specifically change fund balances, cash register balances, making sure those are set and standardized, and then some other areas identified further in the report. We did recommend developing procedures that align with and incorporate the citywide cash handling policies developed by finance and to include the areas identified within the report in those updates. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm available to answer any questions, and I have some of the departments online as well.
Councilmember Lawson, any questions?
Just one question, Councilmember Gardner. So just in general, I know we're doing the auditing on these departments, and it looks like some of these are kind of some concerns, definitely with security. What is the, I mean, you put as you recommend, but what is the obligation? I mean, when does the time frame have to be met to meet some of these things that they have to update or follow? Or is that based on the department director, city manager? Who makes this determination of when these have to be met? Especially some of these ones that are concerns with security.
Correct. So typically what we'll do on audit recommendations, we'll consider the criticality of how significant is this and what does it make sense timeline. Sometimes if it's a software system, it's going to be a longer process to implement, and other ones we'll use that to target an implementation date. And then that's part of in the backup we'll receive. We're tracking those recommendations and getting those updates from departments to try to meet them. In some cases, we revise the dates, and that's usually when they've started the process, maybe they're midway through. And that sort of thing too. So it's kind of, we make the final determination, but we do that in conjunction with the department. We also don't want to set all audit recommendations due the same date. We need to kind of stagger sometimes depending on the number of recommendations. But for something that we consider a critical or really high risk, we're going to make that a sooner recommendation than others. I believe with the property evidence, the reason why that recommendation is, I believe in December, was from discussions with Public Works. A portion of that is a lot harder to implement than some other pieces. So they've addressed a piece. They're working on some other pieces. I've been working closely with Deputy City Manager Laura Perry on updates to make sure we're making progress on those.
Okay. Thank you so much for that explanation. I appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Michelle, for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. That is our last item. And then we have our next meeting scheduled for May 28th at 1:30.
Okay.
And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.